Okay, so you are digging into theme and understanding that you want a unifying theme, so you've got a touchstone that all of your writers can go to, and that can be the test for, do I want this scene in here? Is it speaking to my theme? Now, the other part that we're going to play with is story genius. So what is her hypothesis? Her hypothesis is that the brain is a sense-making machine. We are trying to make sense all the time, and we are trying to keep this entity safe. She has a theory about the development of the brain and how we are looking for patterns and how we're looking for the blip in the patterns. I believe that she goes to an analogy of the Stone Age man, woman, person sitting at the edge of the cave, looking out on the savannah, and the brain doesn't see what's out there. What the brain does, as far as we understand, this is the current science, is that we create blocks of memory. And the brain, because we want to conserve energy all the time, the point of this organism is to continue. So the brain is trying to conserve energy. This is why we keep fat, by the way. And so what it does is it pulls up a block of memory and goes, oh yeah, that tree is over there. So it isn't your eye telling your brain there's a tree. It's your brain saying, I remember there's a tree over there. And that's much, much faster to pull up the files that are already in your brain so that you scan and you lion, danger, not going. Or antelope, food, ooh, lion, still not going. So what your brain is doing is it's looking for these anomalies all the time. It's looking for what is wrong. And I've talked about this in the context of why we favor the critic in our brain. It's a survival mechanism, but it also goes to what misbelief or the flaw or the wound, as it has been called over the years, has to do with story. Lisa Cron's hypothesis is that we are always trying to work out how to be safe in our environment. And mostly, we, writers, us in this room, we're living in relatively safe places. I mean, all of my neighbours have guns and it's a little bit scary, but we mostly live in safe places, right? We're not looking out the window and thinking, the bears could come get me tonight. I mean, last night we had the coyotes, but they're not coming for me. They're coming for my dogs. So what kind of safety are we looking for? We're looking for the kind of safety that is being all right in social situations. How do we read other people? How do we understand other people? How do we navigate the modern world that is full of pitfalls? And her hypothesis is that story teaches us how to navigate the world. And it also teaches us how somebody can, in the bluntest possible way, get over themselves. Because her idea is that we lay down meaning. We lay down meaning when there's something going on. I don't remember the first example that she gives, but her thing is, you're 6, 7, 8 years old. You say, Mummy, Daddy, I want a bike for Christmas. You don't know that Daddy just lost his job. You don't know that Mummy is freaking out because she also has a temp job, but there's another baby on the way. They turn around and they say, shut up! No, you can't have a bike. Don't be so selfish. Actually, that has nothing to do with you as a 7-year-old, but in your 7-year-old brain, you make a story about that incident. And she calls these origin stories, where you make up a foundational story about the meaning of them denying you something. You've got some skin in the game, you get turned down, and you create meaning. And what do you create meaning around? Being told you cannot have a bike. I'm greedy. I'm selfish. I don't know how to put the family first. It's always an I am. It's always the misbelief is about the character who is in that situation. They shouted at me, which means I am blank, and they fill in that meaning. And then what happens is, in the world, as they go out into the world, they read situations through that lens. So when a boss says to them, no, I think we should go in a different direction. Instead of thinking, oh, let's go in a different direction, they think, oh man, I just got turned down. It's because, and then whatever they made up as their misbelief, whatever meaning they gave that story way back when, becomes the meaning of the other person saying, this is what's going to happen. I hate this word with a passion that I can barely describe to you, but it's in the vernacular now. People getting triggered is all about misbelief. It is all about people taking it personally and believing that it means something about them. Not that it means a thing about the world, but it means something about them. So I'm going to talk, so that's the whole theory around misbelief, is that you've got this laid down track, and the point of story is to watch a character go through unraveling that misbelief and overcoming it, which we almost never do. If you have been married for any length of time, you know what it's like when you bump into your significant other's misbelief. When they're like, oh, you always tell me I blah. You always say I'm such a blah. And you think, I don't think that about you at all. I've never thought that about you. You're running into their misbelief. So in story, we watch a character overcome their misbelief or double down, double down, double down, and not change. So the character arc is the character starts in one place with a misbelief and ends in another with either overcoming that misbelief or not overcoming that misbelief. Shoot me questions if that doesn't make sense. I'm going to try and give you an example of how multi-generations of misbelief get laid down on someone. So I've shared this before. If you watch the interview with me and Craig, I said something about misbelief and how misbelief is insidious and pervasive, and it's a kind of imprinting on the brain. It isn't just a way that you look at things. It is a foundational belief about truth. I am blah. I personally am afraid that I am stupid. Where the fuck does that come from? Oxford educated. I've had some very, very high-powered jobs. Clearly, at some point, I realized that I'm not stupid, but I'm still worried. Craig, in that interview, said, yeah, but you've got to make sure that you don't say, so he went to the hero example, somebody who doesn't believe that they're loved and lauded, you can't have them being praised because that would be stupid. You have to keep proving that they are stupid. And I didn't have my wits about me and I couldn't step in and say, no, it's actually the opposite of that. So you've got somebody who doesn't believe that anyone can love them. And when someone says, I love you, they're like, fuck off, no, you don't. You don't love me. You want something from me, right? Depends on what their misbelief is. So I'm going to go to my family because I know lots about my family, decades of fucking therapy. And my father, his parents were married. His father, my grandfather, who I never met, went off to the war. And while he was off at the war, his mother couldn't make ends meet. So she put her boys in a boys' home in Stockport. I might share some pictures of you to show you just how poor that life was, because I found some today and they're really, really fascinating. And she took in a lodger. Oh, lodger is code for she took a lover. It was never ever said. But what we know is when her husband came back from the war, he said, it's him or me. And she said, cheerio. And so my grandfather went to the boys' home where two of his boys had been housed for the war. And they look almost identical. My father and his brother look almost identical. We've got the Pickford honking nose and, we've got to look. You can absolutely see us. And he went to the boys' home and he said, he's mine, he's not. And he took Jared, who is my uncle, who I also never met, and he left my father in the boys' home. So my father was abandoned as a very, very little boy. His mother was completely horrible human being. I remember her, and she was one of the most selfish, horrible human beings I've ever known. My father was very, very clever. He was very clever. And when he was 50, I might cry. He turned into a very unkind person at some level, but I still have a lot of compassion for him. His mother called him a pencil pusher and made him leave school. Sorry. So deep. This stuff goes so deep. So he became a butcher's boy when he was, I think, 14, 15. And when he was 17, he joined the army to get away. And he met somebody who was in teacher training college. I don't think it was any accident. He was desperate for learning. The army paid for him to go through school. He always believed he had this, "You are a fucking pencil pusher," from his mother. You need to go out there and get a real job. You know, something intellectual wouldn't be a real job. And he joined the army, and he took as many courses as he could, and he tried to educate himself. And he believed, because of his upbringing, that life was hard. And his life was hard. I'll share some pictures. His life was brutal. And the way that you raise your children, today has been a rough day. The way you raise your children is to be as hard as you possibly can, so that they're prepared for the world and they're not surprised. And he had an enormously brilliant and outspoken and vibrant son who had undiagnosed ADHD, who, when I went to my brother's wedding, I described it, there's a Japanese phrase, the nail that sticks out will get hammered in. And my brother stuck out. And so my father, who was terrified of the world, had these laid down layers of, you've got to live life a certain way, life is very hard, punish your children as much as possible so they're ready for the world, then they won't be disappointed. And so my brother was pretty much brutalized through his childhood. And I saw this. And what I learned from seeing this, which is generations of layers, is keep your head down. Don't speak your truth. Don't say who you are. This is how I ended up being a ghostwriter for years. And also, one of the mantras of my childhood from my parents was, "You think you're so clever, don't you, Missy?" Mantra. I heard it so often. And my response was, no, 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 no. And I just, mostly at school, I kept my head down. I watched the squirrels. But it turns out I am quite clever. There was one year at school when I won so many awards that the audience stopped clapping. Oh my God, it was a fucking nightmare. And then I got into Oxford. And what my father said when I got into Oxford was, "It'll be bloody wasted on you." Because he was jealous. He was jealous that he never got that chance. And he never got to show the world how clever he was. And he wanted to be clever. And he'd been brutalized. And my mother had been brutalized. She was raised by an alcoholic. And because they didn't kick the living shit out of us, because they didn't, they did kick the living shit out of Liam a few times, but because that kind of physical brutalization wasn't part of our life, they didn't believe that they were cruel. And so all of that back history leads to somebody quite clever, me, believing for their whole life that they're not. I'm not clever, because if I'm clever, they won't love me. And I have worked really hard on this. This is why I write under a pen name, because it isn't because I don't think that I can write a book. I said this to one of my best friends this week. It's because I believe that if they see me and I'm clever, they won't love me. And that, my darlings, is what misbelief is all about. Okay, way fucking overshare, way long. I hope there's something useful. Now I'm going to go and drink the rest of my coffee. Shoot me questions. All right, lovelies. Bye.